Something just moved in the dark behind you, and you scream. You spin, fists up, scanning the black between the trees. Nothing charges. You already handled the thing with teeth tonight, barely, and now you stand there shaking, soaked to the bone. The temperature dropped 12 degrees in an hour, and the rain found you. There is a gash on your leg, 3 days old, and it smells wrong. You are 32. That makes you one of the oldest people your band has ever seen. A skinny kid crouches beside you, poking your wound with a stick, wide-eyed and far too curious for the moment. That's Tusk. He inspects everything, jumps at every sound, and he is not going anywhere. So here is the thing. The wound, the cold, the hunger, the dark. Only one of these kills you tonight. And it is not the one you are thinking of. What actually ended Stone Age lives? The real answer is so strange, it rewrites how hard those lives really were, and how wildly, stubbornly survivable they somehow stayed. So, isn't this just a trick of what survives? You might say it. Predators and violence dominate the fossil record because a snapped, gnawed bone keeps for 300,000 years, while a fatal fever leaves nothing behind. That's a real bias, and a smart objection, but it cuts the other way too. Here's the thing. When you picture a Stone Age death, you see a mammoth, or a rivals club. That picture is shaped by something called availability heuristic mortality bias. Your brain rates a danger by how easily it pictures the drama, not by how often it actually happens. And the drama is everywhere. The predator evidence is genuinely real, to be fair. At Atapuerca in Spain, on hominin bones dated past 300,000 years, you can find confirmed bite marks from a lion, a cave bear, and a wolf. Those are checkable. A cave bear, Ursus spelaeus, was the size of a small car and twice as opinionated. So yes, things ate our ancestors. Tusk nods slowly, unsurprised that the cave was, in fact, the bear's house. But look at what the bones quietly insist on. Eric Trinkhaus at Washington University spent nearly 30 years, from 1983 to 2012, cataloging Neanderthal injuries. And about 7% of their long bones show trauma matching a fall from height. Falling. Just gravity. Doing what it always does to people who climbed and ran across broken ground every single day. Boring. Trauma preserves better than disease, that's true. Yet falls preserve every bit as well as bites, and falls win. The bias in the rock can't explain why your imagination skips straight past the cliff edge to the lion. That part is you. The cliff edge isn't a story you tell around a fire. The lion is. This is the uncomfortable bit about being human. We are terrible, intuitive actuaries of our own extinction. We fear the shark and ignore the staircase, fear the stranger and trust the road, because one is a story and the other is a Tuesday. The Stone Age mind worked the same way, and so does yours, right now reading this. So if it wasn't the lion and it wasn't the rival, what was the Stone Age version of a car crash? The mundane thing that got almost everyone, the quiet killer that left no bite marks at all, the invisible wound. You reach into a thorn bush for a handful of berries. A branch catches the back of your hand, barely. You don't even look down. That scratch is the thing that kills you. This is the septic cascade from minor trauma, and it was the single most reliable path to an early grave in the Stone Age. Here is how it works. A thorn opens your skin, and a few bacteria wander in. Normally, fine, but there are no antibiotics, none, anywhere, for the next 10,000 years. So the bacteria multiply, the redness spreads up your arm, and within 3 days, your whole body shuts down. From a scratch. This was not rare bad luck, it was the weather. We tend to picture our ancestors dying heroically, jaws of a cave bear, dramatic stuff. The truth is far stupider and far more common. Most of them died of an infected splinter and a slow fever. The line between living and dead was not a predator's teeth. It was a sliver of wood you didn't bother removing. And we know this isn't a guess because we have a body. In 1991, 2 hikers found a man frozen in the Alps, dead about 5,300 years, around 3,300 BCE, and we named him Ötzi the Iceman. Researchers in Innsbruck went through him like a medical chart. He had an arrow wound to his subclavian artery, which is the artery under your collarbone, and that is what finally killed him. But here is the part that stops you. When they confirmed his genome in 2012, Ötzi was already carrying the spirochetes that cause Lyme disease, the oldest known case. He also had H. pylori in his stomach, the ulcer bug, alive and angry. So picture the relationship you think exists. You imagine a tough mountain man, hardened, basically indestructible, brought down by a single dramatic arrow. Wrong order. This man was already a walking infirmary, riddled with chronic infection, decades before anyone shot him. The toughest man we ever found frozen was, medically, a mess. That is what being human meant for almost all of human time. Your body was one unlucky scratch from systemic collapse every single day, forever. Naturally, when the fevers swept the camp, an elder would point at the water and announce it was the bad spirits in the river. And everyone nodded, because what else could it possibly be? But if infection was the great equalizer for adults, what was killing everyone before they even reached adulthood, childhood's toll? So here's the obvious objection. Didn't everyone just die young back then? Not exactly. The Stone Age people dropped dead at 30 idea is mostly an accounting trick. Average life expectancy at birth in hunter-gatherer societies was roughly 21 to 37 years, per a meta-analysis by Gervin and Kaplan out of New Mexico in 2007. That sounds grim until you notice what's dragging the number down. Children. Specifically, the ones who never made it. This is the pediatric bottleneck effect, and it's the spine of everything. When Rachel Kaspari and Sang-Hee Lee at Michigan went through the skeletons in 2004, the picture was brutal and consistent. Roughly 40 to 50% of Paleolithic humans died before their 15th birthday. Half the village, gone before they could vote. So the average isn't telling you when a person died. It's telling you that for every elder who made it to 60, there was a tiny grave balancing the books. If you survived childhood, your actual odds improved dramatically. You'd often see your 40s or 50s. The trick was surviving childhood at all, which was statistically about as reliable as a coin flip with a very bad coin. And what was killing them wasn't dramatic. No saber-tooth ambush, no cinematic plunge off a cliff. It was the ordinary gauntlet. A gut infection from bad water, a cough that turned into something worse, a weaning that went sideways, a fever nobody could name. Naturally, when a child burned with fever, the same elder pointed at the water and announced it was the bad spirits in the river. And everyone nodded, because what else could it possibly be? He was, in fairness, occasionally correct, in the way a stopped clock is occasionally correct. Now sit with what this means for being human. Every single adult you ever met in a Stone Age band, every hunter, every grandmother, every storyteller, had already won a lottery that most people lost. They were the survivors of the deadliest journey a human can take, which was simply growing up. Adulthood wasn't an achievement. It was a statistical fluke you only noticed in hindsight. That changes how you should picture those camps. A crowd of grown people is a crowd of improbable outcomes, standing around a fire pretending it was normal. Tusk would have called this morbid. Tusk would have been right, so the very young were dying in vast numbers. But what about the moment of arrival into the world in the first place, the birth gamble? So the young were dying after they arrived. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is how dangerous it was to arrive at all. Walk it back to the moment of birth itself. For a Stone Age woman, this was likely the single deadliest thing she ever did. Not the lions, the geometry of her own body. Here is the trap, and scientists call it the obstetric dilemma mortality. To walk upright, you need a narrow pelvis. To grow a big-brained baby, you need a wide opening. Pick one. Evolution, in its usual style, refused to pick and just shoved both demands into the same skeleton. The result is a baby's head squeezing through a gap that barely fits. Imagine threading a melon through a door frame that was sized for an orange. Now imagine doing it alone, by a fire, with bad spirits supposedly lurking in the river. Tusk's elder, naturally, blamed the river spirits for the screaming. Everyone nodded. What else could it possibly be? We can actually see the damage in old bones. At Çatalhöyük in Turkey, around 7,500 BCE, archaeologists found female skeletons carrying pelvic injury and maternal trauma. Bone that cracked, tore, and never healed right. The body kept a receipt for every birth. When you do the grim arithmetic, the maternal death rate likely sat near 1 to 1.5% per birth. That sounds small. A woman might give birth 6 or 7 times across her life. Stack those odds, birth after birth, and a frightening share of women simply did not survive their own children. The numbers line up neatly with modern unassisted birth, before doctors and clean hands changed everything, which tells you the danger wasn't bad luck. It was anatomy doing exactly what anatomy does. And this is the part worth sitting with. Our two proudest features, the big thinking brain and the upright walk, were paid for in maternal bone. Intelligence and bipedalism aren't free gifts. They came invoiced, and women settled the bill with their lives, one birth at a time. So every clever ancestor staring up at the stars existed because some woman survived a coin flip that killed her sisters. The species was, quite literally, gambling its mothers to keep the brains coming. A brutal trade. We're still here, so it worked. But birth was a single terrible night, over by morning. Beyond the crisis moments of birth and injury, what slow and silent force was grinding people down season after season? Hunger's long shadow. The recurrent nutritional stress signature. That's the dry name for it. It means your bones keep a diary, and the diary is grim. Every season you nearly starve, your skeleton writes it down in chemistry. Not one bad winter, a rhythm, over and over, across a whole life. Scientists read this by measuring stable isotopes locked into old bones. The ratios shift when a body burns its own tissue to survive. At Skateholm in Sweden, they read these Mesolithic skeletons one by one. Roughly 3 in 10 show the same repeated stress markers. That's not a famine. That's a pattern, etched in like tree rings of hunger. Picture it as the body's seasonal budget, and the budget never balances. Fish runs end, berries finish. The deer move on. So you wait, getting thinner, until something comes back. Most years, something does. Some years, it cuts a little closer than you'd like. Here's why this quiet grinding matters more than any single disaster. A well-fed body shrugs off small things. A cut, a cough, a bad tooth. A starved body has spent its savings already. Every threshold drops, and teeth are where this gets nasty. Look at the Neolithic skulls they've examined. About 1 in 10 carries a dental abscess. On its own, an abscess is a swollen, throbbing nightmare. Left alone, it can spread up into the brain and cause meningitis, which kills you. So a toothache becomes a death sentence, not because the tooth got worse, but because the body had nothing left to fight with. Tusk just sat down. He would prefer his teeth not be a referendum on whether he lives. And this is the real lesson, the one that's hard to feel from a soft chair. We imagine prehistoric death as drama. The bear, the cliff, the spear. Mostly it wasn't. Mostly it was a slow, structural weight, pressing down for years, until some ordinary thing tipped a weakened person over. Hunger didn't kill you. Hunger just made everything else lethal. Naturally, the people living it had a different theory. Whenever something new started picking off the band, one elder would announce, with total confidence, that it was the bad spirits in the river. And everyone nodded, because, honestly, what else could it be? So hunger thinned the savings. The rest came for the balance. Smoke, cold, and parasites finished what the empty season started, which raises an uncomfortable question. How did the very home Stone Age people built around themselves turn against them, the domestic hazard? But hold on. Hunter-gatherers today still light open fires, and their lungs aren't all collapsing. Doesn't that wreck the whole idea? Not quite. Today's fires sit in airy huts or out in the open, while your ancestors huddled inside a sealed cave for warmth. That difference is everything. Here's the spine of it. Enclosed environment pathogen loading. The campfire that kept you alive was also slowly cooking your lungs. The water you drank from was busy ruining your gut. Cozy. Scientists found dark deposits packed inside the petrous bone, that dense little nugget around your inner ear, in cave-dwelling populations. The calling card of chronic lung disease. Modern people breathing indoor cook fire smoke carry 2 to 3 times the pneumonia risk. Multiply that across a lifetime in a smoky cave, and the math gets grim. The fire feeds you, warms you, and quietly fills your chest with the stuff. A devoted little arsonist. Then there's the water, which somehow managed to be worse. Dehydration and diarrheal disease remain the leading killer of children under 5 even now. Anywhere sanitation fails. Now strip away every defense because there's no evidence of water purification technology before the Bronze Age. Nobody was boiling or filtering anything. You drink from the same stream your neighbors bathe in. The toddlers don't stand a chance, and the freeloaders inside you. At several Neolithic sites across Europe, researchers dug up coprolites, fossil poop, to use the scientific term, and found Echinococcus tapeworm cysts and ascaris eggs. Lots of them. These people were carrying a heavy parasite burden, hosting a whole ecosystem they never asked for. You ate, the worm ate, and the worm tipped better. So naturally, the elders convened. One stood up, gestured at the river, and announced with total confidence that this was the bad spirits in the water. Everyone nodded. Because honestly, what else could it possibly be? Tusk considered the soot in his lungs, the worms in his gut, the kids dropping, and concluded the elder had a point. Bad spirits. Here's what it means for being human. You built shelter, you built warmth, you gathered close around a single fire and a single stream, and ingenuity turned every comfort into a delivery system for mass death. Proximity is the trap. The home protects you and poisons you in the same breath. But the home, at least, was a danger you made yourself. So if the inside world was this lethal, what happened when the outside world turned on you in a single generation? Climate as executioner? So the home could kill you, yes, but that's not the strange part. The strange part is how fast the whole sky could turn against you. We call it a rapid climate transition mortality event, which is a clinical way of saying everything froze and people died. Here is the headline finding. Around 10,800 BCE, the mean July temperature across northern Europe dropped about 15 degrees Celsius within decades. That's the Younger Dryas, read straight from the Greenland ice core, called GISP2. 15 degrees in less than a human lifetime. You would feel summer get colder than the winters your grandmother described. Tusk simply notes that this is not ideal, and there was nowhere to run. You cannot walk south fast enough when the cold outpaces your grandchildren's birth. Your clothes, your fire, your whole clever toolkit were built for the world that just left. Culture adapts over centuries. The climate did this in about one. That gap is where people quietly disappeared. Cold was the loud killer, but the small ones never stopped working. The European adder, Vipera berus, lived right across your range. And stepping on one was a genuine risk every warm afternoon. Without antivenin, which is to say, with a poultice and hope, a bite killed somewhere between 5 and 10% of people, though the exact prehistoric rate is honestly anyone's guess. 5%. That's a coin you flip with your foot. Disease was older than anyone wanted to admit. We've pulled Streptococcus pneumonia and tuberculosis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, straight out of Neolithic skeletons dated to about 9,000 years ago. So pneumonia and TB were already ancient when your ancestors were figuring out bread. The bacteria had a head start measured in millennia. Naturally, the band needed an explanation for all of it. And the elder by the fire had one ready, the same one as always. It was definitely the bad spirits in the river. Everyone nodded. Because what else, frankly, could it be? This is the part worth keeping. Climate is not the painted backdrop behind human history. It is a hand on the lever, and it can pull faster than you can think. It collapses the thin margin between getting by and being gone, and it does this before your traditions can update. The cold did not negotiate. Cold and disease could erase a whole group from the inside. But the most chilling threat wore your own face when other people became the weapon, and killing your neighbor turned into ordinary Stone Age arithmetic, the violence threshold, sedentism-driven conflict escalation. Here's the grim deal. For most of prehistory, you wandered, and wandering kept you safe. When the neighbors got aggressive, you simply left. Walking away is the oldest peace treaty in the world. There was nothing to fight over, because nobody owned a hill or a grain pit. You can't besiege a man who isn't there. Then, around 12,000 years ago, people stopped moving. They built villages, planted seeds, and stacked food in one fixed spot. And suddenly there was something worth taking. Your stored barley does not run away when raiders show up. Robin McKee, reading the fossil record consensus, points to a sharp turn after 10,000 BCE. Violence between groups climbs fast once people settle down. Warfare becomes a statistically significant cause of death in the late Stone Age, meaning enough people die that the bones keep score. For a species that survived ice ages, that's a strange new way to go. The clearest scar comes from Crow Creek in South Dakota. There, somewhere between 9 and 17% of the skulls show perimortem trauma, wounds dealt right around the moment of death. Fractured heads, in numbers. Now, Crow Creek is dated to roughly 1325 CE, and scholars argue whether it counts as a true Stone Age scene at all. So treat the date with caution, but the pattern it shows is the one we keep finding once people put down roots. Tusk studies the skulls for a long moment. So, we invented houses, he says, and the houses came with a free door for enemies. Yes. Essentially, yes. And of course, when the first raiders came over the ridge, the village elder had an explanation ready. It was the bad spirits in the river. The rest of the band nodded because, honestly, what else could it be? Certainly not the barley. Here's the part that should sit with you. The whole arc, from a thorn scratch that festered, to a fever, to a fixed village with walls, points at one steady truth. The most dangerous thing about being human has always been other humans. The very structures we build to survive together, the granary, the wall, the shared roof, are the same structures that teach us to kill at scale. Cooperation and slaughter grew from a single root. They always have. So we learned to live together, and we learned to murder in the same breath. The obvious next question is the uncomfortable one. If settling down made us deadly, was any of it worth it? So picture it again. The gash on your leg, 3 days old, smelling wrong. The cold drops, you are soaked, and you cannot stop the shaking. The wound is what kills you tonight. Not the dark, not the hunger, not the thing you ran from. And for nearly all of human time, this was the quiet truth. The deadliest force in your world was never the lion at the edge of the fire. It was the splinter you barely noticed going in. We spent 100,000 years dying from small things we could not see, until slowly, stubbornly, we learned to name them. So when you clean a scrape today and barely think twice, who taught you to be afraid of the right thing?